Hi guys, welcome back to day 2 of quadratics. So yesterday what we did is we talked about how x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a is quadratic formula. And that problem, your answers are where the graph crosses the x-axis. Now, yesterday we just did basic ones. Today what we're going to do is ones with GCFs. We're going to do number 2 and number 5. We're going to save number 3 for the third day of quadratics, as that answer is a little bit different than the other ones. So let's first start with number 2. So the first thing I want to do in order to use quadratic formula is one side of the equation has to be equal to 0. If it's not equal to 0, I have to make it equal 0. So again, I'm going to do number 2. So I'm going to get that 12x on the other side. So when I do that, I get 3x squared minus 12x equals 0. Then if you're looking at that problem, you're like, lever check, there's a GCF there. Both of those terms share 3. Exactly right. So instead of pulling out the number GCF, now from here I'm just going to divide by it. And when I divide both sides by it, I end up with x squared minus 4x equals 0. Okay? So then like yesterday, what I do is I identify my A, which is 1, my B, which is negative 4, and my C, which is 0. Like I said yesterday, it's okay for B and C to be 0. It's not okay for A to be 0. So if you're ever doing a problem, you get A equals 0, you did something wrong. So make sure you're just aware of what's going on there. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this problem and I'm going to write it on the paper right over here and just plug it into this equation. So I get x equals negative b. Well, if I look back at b, b is negative 4. So that's going to be a positive 4 there, plus or minus the square root of negative 4 squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. Remember to put the negative 4, this part right here, make sure you put that in parentheses, because if you don't put it in parentheses, your calculator is going to give you a negative 16, and we all know negative 4 times negative 4 is positive 16. So now I simplify down, and I get x equals 4 plus or minus the square root of 16 plus 0 all over 2. Because negative 4 times 1 is negative 4 times 0 is 0. So that just gives me 0. And then when I look at this problem, I'm going to bring it up and I'm going to say, okay, let's simplify under that radical. So I get x equals 4 plus or minus the square root of 16 all over 2. We all know that the square root of 16 is the same thing as 4. So I get x equals 4 plus or minus 4 over 2. And then I'm going to simplify this down into 2 separate problems. So I get x equals 4 plus 4 over 2, and x equals 4 minus 4 over 2. 4 plus 4 is 8. 8 divided by 2 is 4. 4 minus 4 is 0. 0 divided by 2 is 0. So our x-intercepts for this equation are at 4 and 0. So if I was going to graph it, those points would cross the x-axis. Okay? So that's how we handle our GCF here, is all we do is we just divide everything by it. The number then goes away, and then I'm left with a problem just like I was before. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at number 5. Okay? So number 5 has a bunch of different things going on. Number 5 has a lot of stuff on the left and a lot of stuff on the right. So I have to kind of combat all that and say, okay, let me get everything to one side. I want to try to keep A positive as much as I possibly can, because that makes my life a lot easier in the end. Okay? So I'm going to first move everything to one side on number 5. So that's the problem we're on. We're going to do number 5. And when I do that, I end up with 2x squared, because I have minus 2x squared from either side, minus 8x minus 90 equals 0. Okay? Then from there, right away I see that there's a GCF and I want to get rid of it at all possible. So I'm going to divide every single thing by 2. Even the 0 gets divided by 2, even though it doesn't change anything, it still gets divided by 2. So what I'm left with is x squared minus 4x minus 45 equals 0. Okay? So then from there, since I have everything to one side, one of the equations equals 0, I'm going to find my a, which is 1, my b, which is negative 4, and my c, which is negative 45. So this number is going to be a little bit bigger than it was before. Absolutely okay. We're just going to work with it. We have our calculators to help us out. So I get x equals negative 4. So that's going to give me a positive 4 plus or minus the square root of, again, that negative 4 goes in parentheses, minus 4ac. Remember, that's a negative 45. Whole thing over 2 times 1. Okay? So what I'm going to do next, instead of doing it all at once, it gets a little bit confusing. I like to simplify under the radical first to make my life easier. So I get 4 plus or minus the square root of 16. And then I get negative 4 times 1, which is negative 4. And that times negative 45. So that gives me 2 negatives. So I'm going to add that together, and I get 180 over 2. I then add 180 plus 16, and when I do that, I end up with 196. So I get x equals 4 plus or minus the square root of 196 over 2. Well, I actually can take the square root of 196. The square root of 196 is 14. So if I can't do that, normally I would just keep the decimal, and I would separate it up here. But because I can, I'm going to separate that up to 14 over 2. And then just like the last problem, what I'm going to do is I'm going to separate up into 2 parts. So I end up with x equals 4 plus 14 over 2, and x equals 4 minus 14 over 2. 14 plus 4 is 18. 18 divided by 2 is 9. 4 minus 14 is negative 10. Negative 10 divided by 2 is negative 5. So those would be my 2 answers. If I was to graph it, this is where the graph would cross the x-axis. So that's it for quadratics today. We're just solving quadratics when a GCF is present. Come back next time. We're going to solve quadratics when you have an imaginary or a negative under a square root. Have a great day and see you next time.